Imagine yourself as an English soldier, knee-deep in mud and drenched by relentless rain, surrounded by thousands of heavily armored French knights. Your body aches with exhaustion, your stomach growls with hunger, but you know your survival and the fate of England depends on a single weapon, your longbow. This is the setting of the Battle of Agincourt, one of the greatest military victories in history. How did a smaller, exhausted army manage to defeat an overwhelming force? Let's discover it together. In 1415, the 100 Years' War was raging across the lands of France. Henry V, King of England, bold and ambitious, led his army on a daring campaign into French territory. After months of grueling sieges and devastating disease, the English forces were weakened but remained fiercely determined. The French, however, commanded an enormous army, their knights clad in gleaming armor, confident in their superior numbers and homeland advantage. The decisive confrontation took place near Agincourt, a small village in northern France. What followed was not just a battle, it was a moment that would alter the course of history forever, reshaping the relationship between England and France for generations to come. The muddy fields of Agincourt would soon become hallowed ground, soaked with the blood of knights and archers alike, a testament to human courage, brilliant strategy, and the deadly efficiency of the English longbow. If you're passionate about history and eager to unravel the mysteries of great empires like this video, subscribe to the Medieval Archives and never miss an episode. Join us as we journey through time to witness how Henry and his band of brothers faced impossible odds and emerged victorious through ingenuity, leadership, and sheer determination. Dawn broke on the 25th of October, 1415, revealing a grim battlefield that would soon be etched into history. The setting for this legendary confrontation couldn't have been more forbidding. A narrow, muddy field squeezed between two dense forests near the small village of Agincourt in northern France. The heavens themselves seemed to conspire against both armies. For days, relentless rain had pounded the recently ploughed farmland, transforming the once solid earth into a treacherous quagmire. This wasn't just ordinary mud, it was a thick, clinging morass that reached up to the ankles, sometimes even the knees of men on foot. For the heavily armored French knights, this terrain was nothing short of catastrophic. The English, though exhausted from their long march and ravaged by dysentery, recognized an opportunity in this desolation. Henry V, displaying the tactical brilliance that would cement his legend, chose his position masterfully. He arranged his forces in the narrowest part of the field, where the dense forests on either side created a natural funnel. This clever positioning neutralized the French numerical advantage, forcing them to compress their massive forces into a tight, chaotic mass. Most brilliantly, Henry ordered his archers to plant sharpened wooden stakes in front of their positions, a simple yet ingenious defense against cavalry charges. These stakes, angled outward toward the approaching French, created a lethal barrier that would impale charging horses. The English longbowmen stood behind this wooden shield wall, their deadly weapons ready to unleash devastation. What the French saw as merely unpleasant weather conditions, the English recognized as a powerful ally. The mud would slow the heavily armored French knights, while the narrow field would concentrate them into perfect targets for the English archers. Nature itself had provided Henry with advantages no military commander could have planned for. Here's a chilling detail many don't know. After securing his victory, Henry V made one of the most controversial decisions in military history. Fearing that the thousands of French prisoners might overpower their captors if the battle resumed, he ordered the execution of most of his high-born prisoners. Only the most valuable nobles were spared for ransom. Knights and men-at-arms who had surrendered under the rules of chivalry were cut down in cold blood. This brutal command shocked even his own men, and historians still debate whether it was a necessary military decision or an unforgivable war crime. This dark episode stands in stark contrast to the tactical brilliance Henry displayed throughout the battle, revealing the complex moral choices that haunted medieval warfare. The stage was set. Two armies faced each other across a sea of mud, one confident in its overwhelming numbers, the other desperate but brilliantly positioned. As the French knights began their advance, sinking into the treacherous earth with each step, they could not have known they were marching into one of history's most perfectly executed military traps. At the heart of England's improbable victory stood a king whose name would echo through the ages, Henry V. Far from the privileged royal who had spent his youth in taverns and brothels, the Henry who stood before his exhausted army at Agincourt had transformed into something extraordinary, a military genius with an almost supernatural ability to inspire men to fight beyond their limits. As dawn broke on that fateful October morning, Henry knew that morale would determine their fate more than any tactical advantage. Facing a French force that outnumbered his own by more than 3-1, 6,000 weary Englishmen against a staggering 20,000 French soldiers, the odds seemed insurmountable. Lesser leaders might have surrendered or attempted to negotiate terms. Henry chose a different path. Moving among his troops, the king spoke not as a distant monarch to expendable subjects, but as a brother in arms. While Shakespeare would later immortalize his words in one of literature's most stirring speeches, contemporary accounts tell us that Henry truly did address his men with extraordinary eloquence. He reminded them they fought not merely for England, but for each other, a band of brothers bound by hardship and common purpose. The fewer men, the greater share of honor, he told them, embracing rather than hiding their desperate circumstances. This wasn't just empty rhetoric. Henry had made the remarkable decision to fight alongside his men, placing himself in the thick of battle where arrows and swords would show no deference to his royal blood. When a king was willing to bleed alongside common archers, men found courage they never knew they possessed. What many don't realize is that Henry's leadership extended far beyond stirring words. Earlier in the campaign, he had executed one of his own men for stealing from a church, making it clear that discipline would be maintained even in enemy territory. This strict but fair approach earned him the respect of his soldiers and the French civilians alike. He also pioneered the use of English rather than French in his official communications, the language of his common soldiers, a revolutionary move that further bonded him with his troops. Perhaps most telling was Henry's decision to allow any man who wished to leave before the battle to do so, with money for safe passage home. Not a single soldier took this offer. Such was the loyalty he inspired, even when facing near certain death. As they prepared to meet the French onslaught, Henry's men stood taller, their grip on their weapons steadier. The impossible suddenly seemed merely difficult, the hopeless transformed into the challenging. This wasn't just military leadership, it was alchemy of the human spirit. And as the first French knights began their charge across the muddy field, they would soon discover the terrible power of 6,000 men fighting not just for victory, but for their king, their brothers, and their place in history. While Henry's leadership inspired the English army, it was a simple weapon of yew wood that would ultimately decide the fate of two nations. The English longbow, standing taller than a man at 6 feet in length, was perhaps medieval warfare's most devastating innovation, and on the fields of Agincourt, it would demonstrate its terrifying potential. What made these wooden staves so formidable? An English archer could launch up to 12 arrows per minute, each capable of flying more than 300 meters. Now imagine this not from one bowman, but from thousands firing in unison. The sky would literally darken with arrows, creating a deadly rain that no armor could fully withstand. The French knights, who had long dismissed archery as an unworthy pursuit for nobility, were about to receive a harsh lesson in military evolution. The mastery of the longbow was not achieved overnight. English archers began their training as young boys, often before their 7th birthday. The demanding draw weight, requiring a pull of up to 150 pounds, physically transformed their bodies over years of practice. Skeletal remains of English archers showed dramatic bone deformities from the immense forces their bodies endured, with enlarged left arms and twisted spines testifying to their dedication. By adulthood, these men possessed extraordinary upper body strength and could hit targets with remarkable accuracy at distances that seemed impossible to their enemies. As the French knights began their charge across the muddy field of Agincourt, the English archers took their positions. At Henry's signal, they unleashed their first volley. Thousands of arrows arced into the sky before plummeting downward with lethal force. The French, already struggling through the mud, now faced a hailstorm of sharp points designed to penetrate armor. The bodkin arrowheads, narrow, hardened tips specifically designed to punch through metal, found gaps in plate armor or struck with enough force to penetrate chainmail. Most fascinatingly, the arrows that missed their human target served another purpose. They embedded themselves in the muddy ground, creating a bristling field of wooden spikes that further impeded the French advance. Horses stumbled, knights fell, and the orderly charge dissolved into chaos. The already difficult terrain became a nightmare landscape of mud, stakes, and upturned, helpless knights. The genius of the English approach became clear as the heavily armored French knights, who had fallen or dismounted, struggled to rise from the mud. Their armor, designed to protect them in combat, now became a deadly liability. Weighing up to 60 pounds, it transformed men into helpless targets, unable to stand in the slippery mud as arrows continued to rain down. The French, who had anticipated a glorious victory, instead found themselves trapped in a killing field of their own making. So did you know that longbows were so effective they changed the course of the war? If you're enjoying this video, hit that like button, share it with your history-loving friends, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives for more incredible stories from the past. And tell us in the comments, do you think Henry V was a hero who brilliantly utilized the technology of his time, or a tyrant who exploited it for conquest? We'd love to hear your thoughts. The French army that faced the English. At Agincourt wasn't just larger, it represented the flower of French chivalry, the most prestigious fighting force in medieval Europe. Yet for all their gleaming armor and noble bloodlines, they suffered from a fatal weakness that would cost them everything: catastrophic disorganization. As dawn broke over the battlefield, the French commanders found themselves in bitter disagreement. The Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, advocated for patience, wanting to wait for more reinforcements and force the starving English to attack. But many young nobles, eager for glory and dismissive of the English threat, demanded immediate action. This internal power struggle meant that when the attack finally came, it lacked coherent leadership and clear objectives. The French battle plan, if it could even be called that, was shockingly simplistic, overwhelmed the English with superior numbers. They arranged their forces in 3 massive divisions, or battles, with thousands of men-at-arms in each. The vanguard alone contained over 5,000 armored knights and men-at-arms, more than Henry's entire force. In their confidence, they had relegated their own archers, 8,000 crossbowmen, to the rear, where they would prove completely useless throughout the battle. What happened next bordered on the farcical, though with tragic consequences. Instead of a coordinated advance across the entire field, individual knights and small groups charged forward, each eager to claim personal glory by being first to reach the English lines. Medieval chroniclers describe French nobles arguing fiercely over who would have the honor of leading the charge, completely abandoning battlefield discipline in their quest for individual recognition. As these disjointed groups advanced across the muddy terrain, they created human traffic jams. The narrow field, barely 1,000 yards wide, forced the massive French army to compress into an ever tighter formation. Knights who had fallen were trampled by those behind them. Men who had never trained together now found themselves pressed shoulder to shoulder, unable to raise their weapons effectively. Perhaps the most remarkable miscalculation came from the French commander's assessment of the battlefield itself. Any experienced military leader would have recognized that heavy cavalry would struggle in the deep mud, yet the French persisted with their traditional tactics. Their heavily armored knights, each wearing up to 60 pounds of plate armor, sank deep into the mire with every step. What should have been a thundering charge became a painfully slow advance, transforming the knights from fearsome warriors into perfect targets for English arrows. One fascinating detail often overlooked: many French nobles had removed parts of their armor to help them move through the mud more easily. This improvised solution proved disastrous, as it left them vulnerable to the English archers, while doing little to improve their mobility in the treacherous conditions. By contrast, the English maintained perfect discipline. Henry had drilled his men extensively, ensuring each archer knew exactly when to fire and when to conserve arrows. The English men-at-arms stood their ground in tight formation, creating an unbreakable wall against which the disorganized French crashed like waves on rocks. As the battle progressed, the French disorder only worsened. Their tightly packed formation became so compressed that many knights suffocated in their own armor, unable to raise their visors or move their arms as the press of bodies around them grew. What had begun as overconfidence ended in tragedy, not just defeat, but unnecessary slaughter that would decimate a generation of French nobility. When the mud of Agincourt finally dried and the dead were buried, the world of medieval warfare had changed forever. What happened on that blood-soaked field echoed far beyond a single day's battle. It reshaped kingdoms, transformed military thinking, and created a national mythology that endures to this day. For Henry V, Agincourt was the crowning achievement of his short but brilliant reign. The victory elevated him from a controversial usurper's son to one of England's most celebrated monarchs. Within 2 years of Agincourt, Henry would force the French to sign the Treaty of Troyes, recognizing him as heir to the French throne. Though he would die young at 35, before he could unite the two crowns, his legacy was secure. England's claim to French territory would continue for decades, extending the 100 Years' War, but with a new balance of power. The battle itself became an immediate legend. Chroniclers recorded that for every Englishman killed, as many as 100 French nobles and knights had fallen. While these numbers were surely exaggerated, the scale of the victory was undeniable. The French lost nearly an entire generation of noble leadership in a single afternoon. Over 1,500 knights and men-at-arms were killed, with another 1,500 taken prisoner. Among the dead were 3 dukes, 9 counts, and countless lesser nobles. The English, by contrast, lost fewer than 100 men. Beyond the immediate political consequences, Agincourt revolutionized military thinking. The battle demonstrated that heavily armored knights, the dominant fighting force for centuries, could be defeated by disciplined infantry and skilled archery. Military commanders across Europe took note. Technology and tactics had begun to supersede birthright and heavy armor. The age of the common soldier had dawned, though it would take centuries for this transformation to fully play out. Perhaps most fascinating is how Agincourt became woven into the cultural fabric of England. Within a generation, stories of the battle were being told and retold, gaining mythic proportions with each telling. When Shakespeare immortalized the battle in his play Henry V, nearly 2 centuries later, he was drawing on a well-established national legend. His stirring St. Crispin's Day speech may be more fiction than fact, but it captured the spirit of what made Agincourt remarkable: the triumph of courage, leadership, and ingenuity against overwhelming odds. Even today, Agincourt remains a powerful symbol in English culture. The longbow, once England's secret weapon, is now emblematic of English heritage. The battle is commemorated in artwork, literature, and film, each generation finding new meaning in the ancient victory. For the French, Agincourt represents a painful chapter in their military history, but one that ultimately strengthened their own national identity in reaction to English aggression. Historians continue to debate the battle's finest details, exactly how many fought, precisely where they stood, and whether Henry's controversial execution of prisoners was justified. Yet the core story remains as powerful as ever. A small force, led by a brilliant king, overcame seemingly impossible odds through superior tactics, appropriate technology, and indomitable courage. In an age of gunpowder and nuclear weapons, the archers of Agincourt might seem quaint relics of a distant past. Yet the principles that brought them victory, understanding terrain, maintaining discipline, employing the right tools for the job, and inspired leadership, remain as relevant to modern warfare as they were on that muddy October day in 1415. As the sun set over the blood-soaked fields of Agincourt on that October day in 1415, none could have imagined how this single battle would resonate through the centuries. The story of Agincourt is far more than a tale of medieval warfare. It's a testament to what humans can achieve when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. What makes this victory so enduring, so worthy of our attention 600 years later? Perhaps it's because Agincourt speaks to something universal in the human experience. We all face moments when the odds seem stacked against us, when victory appears impossible, when retreat seems the only sensible option. Yet Henry V and his exhausted band of brothers showed us another path. Through brilliant leadership, tactical innovation, and sheer determination, they transformed disadvantages into advantages. The muddy field that should have doomed them became their ally. Their smaller numbers allowed for greater mobility and coordination. The absence of heavy cavalry, which would have been seen as a weakness, forced them to rely on the revolutionary longbow, a weapon that would change warfare forever. Agincourt teaches us that history isn't always written by the strongest or the most numerous. Sometimes it's shaped by those with the wisdom to adapt, the courage to stand firm, and the vision to see opportunity where others see only despair. In our modern world of rapid technological change and global challenges, these lessons remain profoundly relevant. The battle also reminds us that leadership matters. Henry didn't just command his men, he inspired them. He shared their hardships, understood their fears, and transformed a desperate situation into a moment of shared purpose. In our own lives, whether leading a team at work, guiding a family through difficult times, or simply finding our own path forward, we can draw strength from Henry's example. Perhaps most importantly, Agincourt reveals the power of human ingenuity. The English didn't just fight harder, they fought smarter using terrain, technology, and tactics in revolutionary ways. They reminded the world that innovation can overcome tradition, that adaptability often trumps raw power. As we conclude our journey through this remarkable chapter of history, I invite you to reflect on your own Agincourt moments, those times when you faced overwhelming challenges and found unexpected strength within yourself. What were your longbows, your strategic advantages that others couldn't see? How did you transform apparent weaknesses into sources of victory? If you've enjoyed this exploration of one of history's most extraordinary battles, please take a moment to like this video and share it with fellow history enthusiasts. Subscribe to the Medieval Archives for more captivating journeys through the past, from legendary battles and mythic kings to the everyday lives of those who came before us. Your support helps us continue bringing these timeless stories to life. Until our next historical adventure, remember the lesson of Agincourt. Even on the darkest, muddiest field, against the most daunting odds, courage and ingenuity can change the course of history. Thank you for joining us today.